Welcome to Wasteman Corner Crash Course, and today we're going to be discussing the opposite of the previous episode, the left. So last episode, as you know, just like the Christians and the Muslims, first we spoke about the Muslims and then we spoke about the Christians. On this case, we're going to be talking about something slightly different. But these sides also oppose each other with a lot of conviction. So last time we spoke about the right, and this time we're going to speak about the left, so we need to kind of link them together a little bit, because they're so intertwined. The purpose of the right is to destroy the left, and the purpose of the left is to destroy the right. That's usually how they explain their main purposes. So the right, when it becomes extreme, it starts hating the other. It starts seeing the purpose of the country as to bring its people to supremacy no matter the cost. Now, on one side it's a good thing because it brings cohesion. On the other side it's a bad thing because, well, you're not the only people on Earth. You need to kind of have to, converse, to adapt yourself to survive with other people on the planet, especially considering the kind of world we live in nowadays. You know, in the medieval time, a country could be completely segregated from all the other countries around it. In fact, it happened very often. They were in a state of total war all the time, and you wouldn't mind doing that. It didn't matter. But nowadays, however, you need the resources, you need the manpower sometimes, you need the technology from other countries, because specializations of different countries vary. So you can't completely segregate yourself. It's not a beneficial thing to do. Even in medieval times, I wouldn't say it was necessarily a beneficial thing to do. Even though patriotism and religion and stuff like that was very useful to organize those societies. The left, however, is very different. So the origin of the right and left, the origin of these definitions, started with the French Revolution, when the revolutionaries would go on the left and the conservatives would go on the right, the monarchists would go on the right. Nowadays, the right and left have changed meanings very much from those first meanings of right and left. So nowadays it's very different. It's liberals and conservatives, usually, but not always. I call myself a centrist reformist, so I don't really side myself too much with either sides. I side myself slightly more with the right, because I think there's more reason in considering how the world was, and considering history, and considering culture of specific countries, with the reasonable respect and criticism that they deserve, than to just throw it all out the window and just say, oh no, we need to be progressive, we need to start something new. Well, yeah, we need to start new things, we need to evolve, we need to change society, but always in a very thoughtful way. We need to always think a lot before we implement any change. So now that I've explained the basics of far and of left and right, let's talk about the people for Speaker's Corner. And I know I might seem very biased towards the right here, but the left is, in Speaker's Corner at least, is usually very, very vicious. Now, after Jeremy Corbyn has lost the election, thank God, by the way, you don't want a socialist ruling this country. Which doesn't mean I support Boris Johnson, by the way. He's a funny guy, but I don't think he's... I think he's another power whore. He's another person who will, be basically a tool to keep power in his hands and do everything in his power to keep that power, not to improve people's lives. But anyway, let's not talk about my political views. After the defeat of Jeremy Corbyn, the crushing defeat, to be honest, left-leaning people have almost disappeared from the corner, to be honest. Very rarely I see anybody coming to the corner with very left-leaning ideas. So I wouldn't want them to go away, because it's always good to have different opinions. There are a few regulars who still come there, who still annoy people with their speeches against capitalism and against this far right and whatever. But yeah, the left, as I said, the right hates, when it becomes extreme, hates the other. When the left becomes extreme, it hates oneself. So when you're talking to a leftist person, you can already expect a lot of self-loathing from those people, especially when they're white. There will be a lot of loathing for their race, about colonialism, they'll talk about white privilege, and if they're white male, even worse, they'll talk about gender pay gap, they'll talk about all of those things, patriarchy and all of that stuff. Now, I might speak about it later, about patriarchy and gender pay gap. Let's just say that I don't give them a lot of trust. These are ideas that are ideas themselves that are very preposterous in my opinion. Look, very, very, very quickly, speaking about the gender pay gap, for example, if women earned less than men for exactly the same job and exactly the same amount of hours that they do that job, they would just fire all men. And in the Industrial Revolution, it actually happened sometimes that men would lose their job because women and children were working for a lot less payment. And sometimes they were doing almost the same job, so, it was a thing. It happened sometimes. But nowadays, I don't think it's happening. In fact, sometimes people are putting quotas to include specific women in the job, even if they're not worthy of the position. Which is something very bad, because I'm a big fan of meritocracy, and if a person isn't worthy of a position, I don't think the position should be given to them, just for the sake of diversity or whatever. And that's the problem with the left. They see diversity is our strength and all this stuff. That's not how the world works, guys. That's not how it works. You see, just because it's a diverse group, for example, if you have a person from every race, doesn't mean it'll do a better job. You need to always look for the actual talent, for the actual competence of each person, and not at their race. Because just as well as people discriminating against people of different races and not bringing them to a job because they don't like them, it's exactly the same thing. You're giving a lot of importance to race. You're basically saying that you're almost the same as the far right, except that you're doing the opposite thing. You're giving the same amount of importance to race, but instead of loving your own race and hating all the others, you hate your own race and love all the others. So that's why I usually say the far right is similar to the far left in many things, even though they oppose each other. But basically, I wouldn't advise people to speak to leftists from the corner. Especially to socialists, especially when there's a big group of them. I heard there were Antifa sometimes in the park, but fortunately that's no longer the case. I really wouldn't want something like that to happen. It's basically like a group of skinheads wanting to kick anybody, to beat up anybody who doesn't agree with them. Some leftists are pretty tame, so you can talk to them. Expect automatism from them. Expect that they will reject everything that you're telling them, especially because the media nowadays, I don't know what's going on. Like in the education system, in the media, there's this idea of neo-Marxism, neo-Marxist ideology that I'm really concerned about it, honestly, because as you probably know, I come from an ex-Soviet Union country, and there's almost no countries that suffered as much as Ukraine with socialism. So yeah. Not a good thing, not a good way to go. Again, I'm very happy that Jeremy Corbyn lost, but it doesn't mean that we'll have a perfect government now. Not at all. This government is not perfect. Again, I'm a centrist reformist, so I'm all for reforms, change in the way the country is being governed. And I'm also not a conservative. I'm not a Christian. I'm not clinging that much to culture. But I think culture is very important to at least respect it and see what you have to gain from it, and not just throw it out the window because because of some buzzwords. So yeah, I wouldn't really side with the left, and the left honestly hates me. They hate my guts. Every time I put my feet in Speaker's Corner, they call me far right or whatever. They have their own. They live in their own little world. Anybody who disagrees with them, they call them far right. So again, for the people who are coming to Speaker's Corner, I would advise to be careful when talking to people, left-leaning people. Not all of them, because sometimes they can be a bit more like this sort of soy boy. In this case, they will not be very aggressive, but they will have self-destructive ideologies, most likely. This time I'm basically talking mostly about the political left. I'm not gonna talk too much about, ramifications of the left, which are the Extinction Rebellion people, the vegans, to a certain extent even flat earthers, honestly. I would also link them to this group of people. But I'm not gonna talk about these guys too much. I'm gonna save them for another video later on. So yeah, that's what I have to say about the left in the park. Be careful, you can talk to them, but yeah, just be careful, because sometimes they can get a bit violent. See you next time.